According to the county's own projections, we're going to see almost 8 feet of sea level rise in the next 100 years. If you put today's floodplain, which is from storm surge, on top of that 8 feet, you end up about 3 feet below the room we're sitting on. Okay?
That's significant.
Yeah, so that's 100 years from now that you're going to have to build at this level. So,
and that doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
That's going to progressively get worse. So any, major storm, any major, weather system that comes through here is going to create increased vulnerability to the house.
So the big
over time.
question is, how serious are we about climate adaptation? Because the reason they don't allow us to build 2 stories here today is because there's a lot of sensitivity in residential neighborhoods about height, because the neighbor's houses are low and they don't want a tall house next to them. Sea level rise, it's not trivial, right? Because we all know, okay, we want to adapt to it. But who's willing to make those little forward-thinking sacrifices today to really say, okay, you know what? We have to let people build high now, because buildings last a long time. And if we want to be sustainable, we can't just tear them down and throw them away because we built them too low.
Before we go into the podcast, if you could just go and rate this show on whichever platform you're listening to it, it makes a huge difference to the podcast, the amazing conversations we get to have, and the incredible guests we're able to get on the podcast. So it's probably not something you would think about, but if you could just go rate the show, follow it, or share an episode, it does make a huge difference to the show. Thank you so much. In a world increasingly facing the challenges of climate change, with the Building Green podcast, we will dive deep into the intersection of architecture, design, urbanism, and environmental responsibility. I'm Ladina Schipf, your host. I've been an architect and building site manager for the past 10 years. During my studies at ETH in Switzerland, as well as in my working environment, I've had many touchpoints with sustainability, like many of you, I guess. I've also learned to question what I've been told, which is why I decided to go deeper into the topic and uncover what sustainability actually means. My mission is to highlight the transformative power of sustainable architecture, not just as a practice, but as a catalyst for broader societal change. Subscribe for more of our content and enjoy the show. Nathalie, Manzano, and Caplow didn't just build a house. They engineered a philosophy. A bold rejection of short-term thinking, which is kind of baked into the DNA of South Florida's building culture. One of them is a public health researcher turned green building advocate, the other an engineer with a background in renewable energy and food systems. Together, they have built the world's first well-certified home. With the construction method they've developed, which they call hypostruction, they're rethinking everything we assume about how homes should be built in the US. And they're doing it with a clear vision, to create homes that last 100 years or more. The project isn't located in a luxury district, but in a regular Miami neighborhood, on purpose. Because for them, this isn't just about climate adaptation, it's about proving that better, healthier, longer lasting homes are possible now. Let's dive in. Ted and Natalie, you built this amazing house we're in right now, which is not only innovative from a sustainability perspective, but it's also well certified, actually the first one in Miami or all over?
In the world.
In the world, wow.
In the world.
So it is also a healthy building. Now, before we go into all the technical details, let's start with you two. So you have very different backgrounds. Can you tell me about your backgrounds and why they complement each other so well?
I am an engineer, really, by training. My background is in renewable energy, and then I moved from there into green technology for food production. And then I moved from there into education about green technology. So the early part of my career was really about bringing some of these sustainable ideas and technologies to the public and to school children, to adults. And I did several public-facing education programs about green technology. And what we do at Caplow Manzano, in some ways, is a continuation of that mission. You know, we're trying to build houses that are very forward-thinking, very sustainable, very resilient, and that bring together a number of different techniques and methods and technologies to build a better house. And then we're putting them on the market to sell them, to the general public, and hopefully to make an impact and encourage change across the whole building sector. We're not interested in doing anything that's been done before. We're interested in innovating, and we're interested in making an impact. So we don't keep things secret. We like to share what we're doing because our goal is to have other people adopt the same type of ideas. But that's my approach. I'm sort of an engineer. It's a problem. We try to solve it, have a solution, and then share that solution.
So my background is a little bit different. I have a public health background. I did health disparities research in New York City for a long time, and in that work, learned about how human health is impacted by the housing that they live in. There, the problem is asthma, especially in early childhood. So because of exposure to allergens, molds, mildews, pests, and heavy exposure at a young age creates vulnerability for asthma. And taking that across life with me, I also have asthma, and understanding how we can build better so that homes don't make people sick or impact health. I think we're really focused on food. Folks are willing to spend, extra money for organic strawberries or organic products and think about the food that they're taking in, but don't really think about the materiality of their home and how that has an impact on how healthy or unhealthy they are and long-term outcomes.
It makes so much sense now, knowing where you both come from, that you ended up building this project this way. Now, for those who didn't watch the house tour, can you summarize in a few sentences what makes this house different from a traditional building?
Yeah, this house is built to last longer, to run more efficiently, and to be healthier than a traditional building. So it's really a big step forward in a lot of different ways for modern home construction in South Florida. We can't talk about the future in Florida without thinking about climate change. And as much as I think many people have worked for many decades to reverse climate change, to curb carbon emissions, and to get this under control, I think it's pretty clear now as we sit here in 2025 that that's not going to happen. We're going to continue to see climate change. We can mitigate it, but we're certainly going to have increasing impacts according to all of the science and all of the data, the observations. So now the name of the game is adaptation. And we're thinking about that when we build this house. How do we build a house that's climate ready? Not just now, not just 10 years from now, not just at the end of your 30-year mortgage, but throughout the lifetime of the building. And a good building should last at least 100 years. If we think back about history, whether we look at even a city like Miami and we look at some of the earliest structures here, certainly when we look in older parts of the country or around the world, in Europe and Asia, what you see are really old buildings, and those buildings are revered and respected. They create place and community and a sense of meaning. And that's because they were built out of materials that are very long lasting, and they were built in a way that that was designed to last, where a certain investment of time and energy and thought went into how you were going to build this structure. And that's the philosophy that we bring to the houses that we build. We want these houses to be here at least 100 years from now, maybe 200 years from now. And that changes everything about the way you build a house.
I think that, climate ready to South Florida, what does that mean? That means hurricanes, that means flooding, that means rain, that means increased heat. So how the house deals with those vulnerabilities, because climate change means different things for different parts of the country. But here we're really focused on water intrusion and what that does to the interior of a home.
Yeah, I really like the aspect of building with the climate and not against it, because we're not stronger than the climate. So you developed your own construction method, hypostruction. Can you talk about what it is and how it's different from traditional construction methods in the US?
Sure. Hypostruction just means building with less, hypo meaning less, and structure referring to building. And we use that word to explain how we approach the house from the inside out, really. We think about all the things that are inside a modern home that maybe aren't necessary or even desirable. Things that might release toxins into the air, things that might decay or break down or mold or rot or harbor pests or pose some kind of hazard or just take up space. And we ask ourselves, can we build without all of that stuff inside the house? When you walk into a normal house, you're not really seeing the house. You're seeing these partition walls made out of drywall typically. There's a cavity inside those walls. There are all kinds of things may or may not be going on that you don't know about. You don't really see the materials, the insulation that's inside those. A lot of times it's fiberglass insulation in this country. It's not very healthy stuff. It's not good to breathe it. It doesn't handle moisture very well. And in particular, you can't really see that. You don't know what's going on. Even if there's a leak in your house, most of the time, you don't know until there's a yellow stain on the ceiling. And that's not really where the leak is. That's just where the leak has dripped onto. The leak is somewhere further up in your roof, and you have to go tear apart your house to find it. So our approach is, what if we kind of scoured all that stuff out and tried to build the inside of the house in a more honest and transparent fashion? So we take away the drywall, we take away the cavity walls, we take away the ceilings, and we take away a lot of the floor. And it sounds terrible, but of course it's quite lovely once you figure out how to finish those surfaces. In this house we have polished concrete floors, we have an exposed concrete slab above us on the ceiling. The walls are made out of solid plaster. It's a lime plaster right over the concrete block of the wall. We put the insulation inside the wall instead of within the living space. So what I mean by that is the insulation is actually inside the concrete block itself, filling up the cells in the block, instead of on the inside of the wall, which is where you often find it, which is sort of our space. And I don't really want that insulation in my space. I want it, out there somewhere. Same thing with the roof. The insulation is above the slab. Same thing with the floor, because this is an elevated home, because we want it to be here for 100 years, so it's elevated for sea level rise. So it needs insulation, because this is a very warm climate, so we need to be able to stay cool inside. But the insulation is underneath the slab. Instead of being here in our space, it's outside of our space. And that's really the hypostruction idea, is kind of a reductionist philosophy to see what can we take away. And when we do that, we make a house that actually lasts longer, because a lot of these extra materials are where the problems come from. It's where the decay comes from. It's where the health problems come from. If you were to spray a hose around this living room, and please don't, but if you were, it would be fine. Okay, the house would be fine. You do that in a normal house, and you have to start replacing walls and go hunting for moisture, and you have a mold problem. This house, just dry it off and keep going for another 100 years.
It's really an honest approach, as you described it before, Natalie. And I like how, from a design perspective, you still manage to keep it warm by combining this cold concrete floor and ceiling with the oak panels on the walls and on the ceiling in the kitchen. It's really nice.
Well, that's a dual purpose. To create these accessibility moments, the millwork, allowing the wood, created an easy panelized system. So everywhere you see that oak product, that's fully removable. So you don't have those hidden spaces, something that you can't do with a traditional drywall or wall board. This creates, complete flexibility. We talked a little bit before we got to recording about the waste generated from a house, especially when you remodel, and how that doesn't suit climate change, the waste created by houses. With this, you create more flexibility. Although this is still an imperfect system, the panels allow for movement within the walls, doesn't allow for all that waste from materiality. So these panels can be reused and reconfigured. So you'd have to reconfigure the framing, but still reuse the same kinds of panels because the walls are going to be similar. This is a readily available product, so create some flexibility. We're still trying to find that perfect flexible wall product. We haven't yet, but that's the goal, and my real passion is how do you create houses that can change with a family or can change with the occupant and not generate that waste.
You mentioned the contrasting materials, though, and that is representative of the type of problems that we've had to solve when we started changing the way an interior is built. When we take away the drywall, you take away the wall cavity, now you have to figure out where do I put the plumbing, where do I put the electric. And when you create all these hard surfaces, you have to figure out, well, how do I make it still feel homey and livable? So we do a lot of research on both the technical and aesthetic side of the problem, to figure out how do I recreate a home with these conditions. And you're absolutely right, the wood is a warm moment. There's the wood soffit back here, which is functional because it gives us our lighting and our air conditioning. It's also accessible because that's not drywall, so you actually can remove paneling up there, and if you need to replace those systems or upgrade those systems or inspect them or what have you. But moments like that are important because people don't really want to live inside a concrete box that's only a concrete box, right? So
well, it's not practical for the systems either. I think that would feel more like a warehouse than a home.
Yeah, well, you'd have a lot of exposed
conduit, exposed piping that maybe wouldn't feel as warm. As
so we have wiring buried in the slab above us, which is not that unusual, but it's important. And we have floor outlets instead of wall outlets, again, for kind of these structural reasons. The other nice thing about this house is all the light coming in from outside, and I think that's always a super important element in making things feel homey and warm. And oddly, here in South Florida, it's quite common to build dark houses. I think
sometimes for thermal performance.
Yeah, well, the vernacular here, I think, has always remembered the era before air conditioning, when you really needed to build caves as much as possible.
In order to keep things cool and keep the heat out.
But modern materials, modern windows have much higher performance, and so we can get away with having more glass.
And how deep did you go into studying the passive architecture aspect of it, where to place the windows to make the most of it?
Medium deep. So we certainly think about that. We do modeling around it. I have studied a lot of passive architecture ideas and techniques. Some apply in some climates more than others. Here, you're absolutely right. It's about the windows, about the orientation, the overhang, and we model the energy load in the house before we build it. Having said that, there's always a trade-off with, again, the performance level of the window and the materiality. How much do you want to spend? So we can't be, I don't want to say can't, but most people will not live in a completely passive house in South Florida because of the climate. It has extreme heat and humidity. So you're really striking a balance. You have to have mechanical systems here. You're talking about air-conditioned environments. As much as you'd like to have things be more passive, you have to. We can put any number of opening windows in a house, and then somebody will buy that house and close all those windows and turn down the air conditioning.
What's been the reaction so far by visitors, especially non-architects?
It's been really interesting showing the house. I think most people are really appreciative of the change in style. It's a modern home, yes, but it feels warm. And I think that most people come in here expecting a house that's really stark, and it actually feels really cozy. I think that most people don't realize the additional space under the house, how grand it can make. This is only a 2,500 square foot house, but because of all the windows, because it's elevated, and because of how open it is, we talked about reducing the depth that you're building out because you're not furring out the walls. It feels much bigger than it actually is. So I think people are mostly surprised and really do appreciate the change in construction.
Yeah, to be honest, people have responded very positively to the house and to the materiality of the house. The finishes, the way the polished floor looks, the fact that you can see the structure of the house, you can see the concrete slab above you. They like the wood paneling. People ask us, why did you build this house in this neighborhood? And that's where it gets kind of interesting. And because, well, folks will come and say, oh, it's a very, very nice house, but this is just sort of a normal neighborhood, and it is. This is a very kind of mid-market part of Miami. This is one of the only houses on the block that is at this elevation. So we're actually, as I look out the window behind you, I'm looking across the rooftops of the neighboring houses, which gives us great views and light, but it really tells you that this is not a luxury neighborhood. And they want to know why you have this very nice progressive house in a neighborhood that isn't full of similar type structures. And for us, that's kind of the point. It's like we're introducing a change, and change always, stands out a little bit.
And I'd argue that this house, even in a higher value neighborhood in South Florida, would still stand out because you're not seeing this elevation across the board. You're not seeing these materials across the board, even at the higher price points. So while it's making a statement here that's very obvious, I think that this house in other neighborhoods would still have that same impact as to like, wow, why did they elevate the house? Why does this look different from everything around me?
For sure, and there's some peculiarities in the zoning code about elevation in Miami, and we can talk about that at any length, but this neighborhood is not a flood zone yet, and yet's the key word. So nobody around here thinks that you have to elevate your house. So they look at this as like, oh, why did they build that here? Well, in 50 years, they're not going to say, why did they build that here?
Well, we know that the flood maps that are coming out very soon will have this in a flood zone. In a higher risk area.
And I believe 10 years later, this will actually be in a flood zone. And a lot of the houses that we see around us cannot survive another 50, 60 years because this neighborhood is going to flood. But nobody knows that. Nobody's thinking about that now because of the way, because of the way we handle flood risk. We're always playing catch up. We're always kind of looking at, oh, what's the problem right now today? We're not thinking about what's it going to look like down the road.
Do you get a lot of criticism you mentioned before you wanted to build this house to last for the next 100 years, and you decided not to use the square footage on the ground floor because of the flooding in 50 years. Do you get a lot of criticism for that?
We haven't. I think it's more interest. It's the question as to why would you lose all that space? So as Ted mentioned, the zoning code hasn't caught up. Eventually it's going to, and you could have built a duplex here that's elevated. But it hasn't, and we really want to make a statement that we all need to catch up. This is going to happen, and we are just trying to make people see that there's a better way to build, and you need to adapt in order to do that.
Yeah, I think people looking at the house or thinking about buying the house don't criticize that. Another developer might say, "Hey, you gave up all that space," so there's an economic penalty in essence to the developer, but that's a zoning issue. You should be able to build a house. Think about it. We're just building a house that will last 100 years, and you should be able to do that here. In order to do that, according to the county's own projections, we're going to see almost 8 feet of sea level rise in the next 100 years. If you put today's flood plain, which is from storm surge, on top of that 8 feet, you end up about 3 feet below the room we're sitting on. Okay?
That's significant.
Yes, that's 100 years from now that you're going to have to build at this level.
And that doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
That's going to progressively get worse. So any, major storm, any major, weather system that comes through here is going to create increased vulnerability to the house.
So the big
over time.
question is, how serious are we about climate adaptation? Because the reason they don't allow us to build 2 stories here today is because there's a lot of sensitivity in residential neighborhoods about height, because the neighbors' houses are low and they don't want a tall house next to them. So the zoning board and it's a combination of bureaucracy and architects who volunteer and zoning boards and things, but they all a little bit conservative, and they think, well, we want people to be happy today. We want, when a new house goes up on the block, we want everyone to say, oh, it's a beautiful new house, it makes the neighborhood better. But that house, it still isn't high enough, for to last a really long time. So it's a very difficult, sea level rise, it's not trivial, right? Because we all know, okay, we want to adapt to it. But who's willing to make those little forward-thinking sacrifices today to really say, okay, you know what? We have to let people build high now, because buildings last a long time. And if we want to be sustainable, we can't just tear them down and throw them away because we built them too low.
Or be in a situation where you have a catastrophic event come through and then you have a massive rebuild because entire neighborhoods weren't ready.
Well, you're not going to be able to insure these houses.
That's the other thing.
In 20 years here, nobody's going to be able to get insurance on half the houses in South Florida because they're built too low. And then we're going to be throwing away houses. So at least, hopefully, we won't be throwing away, this house.
You mentioned insurance. That brings me to the economical aspect of it. How much did you spend for the house compared to what a traditional house would have cost here with traditional building methods?
It's hard to know. I would say about 20% more than what a traditional house costs. I think that as a developer...
But I want to also, that 20% is because of the innovation. Okay, it's not that the materials are more expensive. It's less. There's no drywall in this house. There's no flooring in this house. Most people would we'd have either a marble floor or a wood floor. This is just polished concrete. So there's nothing inherent to the nature of the house that makes it expensive except innovation. Okay, and that's expensive because you're doing things for the first time. You have to find new methods. You have to try new materials. You have to spend extra time drawing the plans. All of that added about, I think 20% is a fair figure.
And you have to convince those around you that this is not more expensive. So in bidding houses, we now have construction in-house to avoid some of this, but plumbing is more expensive because they're like, well, I don't want to do that. Little things that you're like, it's not any different. This is actually easier because my plumbing is running straight through in a linear fashion. It's not, a spider web through the house. But I think that the innovation sometimes scares people who are used to doing things a certain way.
Yeah, this house is about $800 a square foot. And that's just counting the square feet up here, inside the house. All of that space under the house, makes it even cheaper because really that's a lot of extra space. It's not fully enclosed space, but it's a lot of extra usable space. In today's market, these are not crazy numbers. It's not a super expensive house. And
that's the sales cost, not the...
No, that's the construction cost. But I'm saying with the extra 20%, with all the innovation, this house was about $800 a square foot, all in, to build. I look at it as a prototype. We'd like that to be $500 a square foot. 10 years ago, you'd want it to be $200 a square foot, but that's not the
market.
That's not the market we're living in. That's not the way things are priced and cost. So it's not crazy expensive. Let's put it that way.
If you're enjoying the show, I have a small favor to ask that would mean the world to me. By rating and sharing the podcast, you're helping us grow and spreading our mission of making sustainability really desirable and cool to a wider audience. Besides of that, imagine impressing your colleagues with the latest insights on sustainable architecture. So make sure you follow the podcast and become the most informed in the room. Thank you so much for your support. And what do you expect to sell it for? More than those 20%?
We're not building this house to make a profit. This house was built as an example and a prototype. If this house were in a more expensive neighborhood, it would have made a profit. The build cost would have been exactly the same. Because we put this in a very normal mid-market neighborhood, we will sell it for about what it costs to build. It'll be around cost.
The reason why I'm asking it is obviously I'm interested in seeing if there's interest, if there's a market for innovative houses that are more long-lasting, or if people tend to be more traditional and go with the safe choices.
So what we've found since finishing this house is that we're getting private clients that maybe don't want to live in this neighborhood, but that are interested in our methods for their own home and for their own space in the world. So we are seeing the interest, just not here.
The house has not been difficult for people to understand or accept. Mm-hmm. It's not, as you walk around and look at it, it's not terribly avant-garde. It's not a painful space to be. It's really very pleasant. It's well lit. It's got big ceilings. It's got nice finishes. People like the house. People do not complain about the fact that the front door is elevated above the street, which is really the main lifestyle change here, is that you're going to walk up a few steps to your front door, which is very healthy. But people don't, that's not an issue. People are not saying, we really like the house, but want you to lower it. You're getting a view, you're getting light, you're getting longevity, you're getting a space underneath. I don't think the product is difficult for people to wrap their head around. And I think that in terms of what makes it appealing, though, we're at an early stage of figuring that out. This is a healthier house if you have allergies. So we have had some people come through the house who have a lot of asthma or allergies, and they say, "This is my dream home." Right? This is perfect. This is what I wish everyone would do, because they look at the finishes and the walls and the way it's constructed, and they realize that it's the best you can get if you have allergies. We also have, which we didn't talk about, we have air filtration built into the house. We have, some active
and monitoring.
Actives and monitoring. So it's both passive and active. So you have that audience that I think is looking for a healthy place, or parents who are raising kids and they're worried about toxic materials in the home. This is well certified, LEED Platinum. This is about as clean and healthy as it gets.
For both you and for the environment.
Yeah. And then you have the sustainability audience that's thinking about impact, and then you have an audience that maybe is thinking about resiliency. I really want to live in South Florida, but I worry it's all going to wash away, or I don't want to own a property that I can't insure, and this house addresses that as well. I honestly can't say which of those kind of market positions is most compelling. It's a big world out there. Everybody looks at a home in a different way. I will say, you have to satisfy people's need for an attractive home, no matter which of those buckets you fall into. Nobody moves into a house they don't like because of some externality, or almost nobody does.
Definitely. Now let's go back to the sustainability aspect. It's a popular opinion that concrete is not sustainable. How do you respond to that?
It's all about lifetime, right? So, and also where you are. The concerns around concrete are mostly around the carbon intensity of manufacture. And if you were to assume that the concrete house and the non-concrete house were to last exactly the same amount of time, then you would find that the carbon intensity of the concrete is higher. If you recognize that the concrete house will last 3 times as long, then it starts to even out. If you recognize that we're in South Florida in a time of climate change, we have very strong hurricanes, and those are increasing, or appear to be increasing. We already have the strongest building codes in the country. You have to build in concrete here. There's no such thing as a non-concrete house in South Florida. People have tried. There's a couple. I've seen some cross-laminated timber houses, and I've seen a few other things. And you have older structures in the county that were built out of wood, and a few of those are still around. But by and large, nobody in today's world wants to invest, a huge chunk of money in a house that is not made out of reinforced concrete, in a place where the wind blows at 150 miles an hour.
And you have termites to deal with.
And termites, yes.
Which create vulnerabilities to these wood structures.
So you don't really have a choice here. So our goal is, given that you're dealing with, a somewhat intensive material on the front end. You want that house to last as long as possible. Equally important, if you're really gonna nerd out on this stuff, even for a concrete house, the important carbon impacts are during the lifetime of the house for operation. Okay, we have to air condition that house, we have to maintain it. That takes power. The power has a carbon footprint. That is much, much larger than the embodied carbon in the house over any reasonable time period. We're not talking about 5 or 10 years, but 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Okay. So how efficient the house is more important.
The thermal performance of
what
this
it's made out of.
structure.
Yes.
I think over the long term, you would
it's
clear as day choose
no,
this.
for sure. There's nobody who seriously looks at that and doesn't reach that conclusion that it's the operating efficiency of the house is more important than the embodied energy.
Yeah, and I think also the functionality and all the design aspects of how nice it is, how nice it feels, how nice it looks, add a lot to the longevity of a building.
I'm glad you said that because we talk a lot about resilience. Resilience is not just about the physical building. It's also about how satisfying the building is to human beings, because a building's only as resilient as people let it be. And if we don't like a place, we tear it down.
Or we remodel, so we've tried to create a very neutral palette in this house so that you can make it your own with furniture, with window coverings, with decor, rather than the constant remodel and consumerism that we've been taught is appealing.
Out of date.
And you don't want it to look out of date.
If you go shopping for a house in Miami today, everything more than 20 years old is what they call it's a gut. You know, you look to the house, you'd be like, oh, it's a nice house, but it's a gut. Because anybody who buys it today is gonna gut that house. They're gonna rip everything out of the inside because the finishes that people were putting in houses 20 and 30 years ago are no longer appealing. Are no longer appealing, and to our eye,
not neutral.
Not neutral. Yeah, very like
hard to make your own.
Yeah, people red veined marble counters in the kitchen, and you see all kinds of stuff like that, and everything has got a sort of a Spanish revival decor to it. Everything's got moldings and all kinds of things that just are very short-lived in terms of their popularity. It's like making you wear the clothes that were in your closet 20 years ago. Yeah, people don't want to.
Just like this 20 years ago.
People don't want to do that.
Yeah, and it's not just about the finishes, also the functionality, as I mentioned before. And I think what you show really good here is it takes so much more design skills to design a house that's functional, flexible for a long time, and not just nice for now.
We did a lot of thinking about what makes a house functional for the long term. So looking at architecture that's lasted and what makes those houses appealing. You and I talked a little bit about Farnsworth House and how we kind of use that as inspiration. What makes that house beautiful so long? 70 years? How old is that house? 70-ish years?
Yeah.
You wouldn't renovate that house if you walked into it. It looks just as modern today as it did 70 years ago. So it's just, how do you create that space? How do you create that environment? How do you create that feeling that you can make it your own again, but not have to redo everything inside of it?
And I like what you did with the furniture to add a little bit of color, some character.
This is, again, not to everybody's taste. We were very deliberate with the furniture. So all the furniture here takes the human health aspect into account. Everything is Green Guard Gold or no VOC, made from sustainable materials. So this was more to demonstrate that it's not just about the house, it's about the way you live in it, and making sure that we're taking our principles and continuing it through into the furnishings of the home.
So for those people who are looking to renovate their home in a more healthy way, if we talk about finishes, but also furniture, what are the things you would recommend them to look after?
So natural materials is one, understanding where wood products come from, how things are painted, whether they have VOCs in them or not. A lot of product spec sheets will tell you what the materiality is and whether they're going to off-gas. Easier to find in children's furniture than in adult furniture, and sometimes unfortunately at a higher price point, but these things are available. So doing a little bit more research about where products are coming from, what they're made out of, and whether you can trace traceability. There's some good websites that I can send to you that make it easy for consumers to kind of try to find the right types of products.
What's the biggest learning that you took out from this house, and what's something you would do differently in the next versions?
We learned a lot from this house. We learned a lot of it was good. So we learned that the exposed concrete surfaces work really well, and we did not have for this house what's called architectural concrete, or a high-end, fancy contractor to do the concrete. This is actually a very mid-market contractor that built the house. It's a pretty standard concrete slab, the one that we're sitting on. It polishes up very nicely. And the same thing overhead. We didn't do anything terribly special. We did learn, next time around we might make some little changes to how the formwork for the concrete is made, so that some of these lines between what were the boards that held the concrete aren't so prominent. But by and large, we learned that you can use pretty standard construction methods to achieve these exposed surfaces. We learned how to put the plaster, what type of plaster would work, lime plaster in this case, because we didn't want gypsum-based plaster because it's not very water durable. This plaster is very water durable. Lime plaster is the same stuff that you see on medieval cathedrals that's 1,000 years old.
As Ted was saying earlier, we had our construction manager hosing this wall down and nothing. It's pretty durable.
So we really learned that a lot of these materials will work. On the flip side, the paneling system for doing these cavity walls with accessible paneling, that was all custom for this house. And we learned that is very tricky and time consuming.
And expensive.
So that's something that I think we're continuing to develop other systems,
to iterate.
other ways to do that. We've learned a bit about the climate control. It's a LEED platinum house, so there's certain requirements under LEED for how there's fresh air and ventilation in the house, and it's complex, but there's a lot of different ways to do that, and we've learned some of what works and what doesn't. So there's been a bunch of technical lessons. Most of what we've learned has been encouraging. There's a lot of things here that we continue to use in our design work and replicate in other houses.
For me, it's space. What made this space livable? I think the connection between indoor and outdoor. So as we designed other houses, we're like, wow, how do we create these moments that felt really nice and make this house feel special? The big windows, the connectivity, again, the use of materials throughout. The one challenge I had, was around furnishing, and that's something that I am still continuing to try to figure out, so that adapting to different aesthetics, being able to find the right types of staging furniture for the houses, I think is the one thing that we don't entirely control, and I want to continue to workshop.
That's cool. What's next for Caplow Manzano?
We have 4 or 5 other houses under development. One that's just started construction. These houses are a bit larger. They're in various different neighborhoods, different types of neighborhoods, different parts of town. Those houses have pools on their lot. The swimming pool's really outside the house. It doesn't have a whole lot to do with our house because our house is elevated. But of course, it's nice to have. So they're a little bit more complete, or they meet every expectation of in more luxurious neighborhoods here. We're also working on a commercial project where we're trying to take this set of ideas and translate them into
a health and wellness facility in Fort Lauderdale.
Well, that and also like essentially an apartment building, a condo or a live-work building. We're looking at a couple of different concepts that would be more accessible to a broader population of home buyers, because the price point of a full house, it's high, and we're in an affordability crisis nationally, but especially in Miami. It's very, very hard for first-time home buyers here. So to create some kind of stepping stone where you can get into a very healthy space that follows these design ideas of hypostruction without spending millions of dollars, either through rental or by building smaller apartments. So we're very interested in doing that. Our goal is not just to build luxury, but it's to show that these techniques can be used up and down the value chain.
And across different types of buildings, so commercial spaces, retail spaces, food and beverage spaces, so really trying to branch out in the types of work that we do.
I wanted to talk about the scalability of the construction method, or your model in a way, but that answers the question.
We feel like this can work in any type of building, and we're really just trying to find the right, for the commercial projects, the right types of partners to work with, so that we can really showcase their vision through our concept. Or their concept through our vision.
100%. It's as you heard, our background's in engineering and science education and public health. It's not in real estate development. We've been doing this now for 6 or 7 years, but it's like every field, it's quite complex, and building a multifamily or a mid-rise building, apartment building, is a whole nother level of complexity than building a single-family home. So we started in single-family homes, and that's really where our expertise is. Moving into bigger buildings requires some time, and we're progressing that way. But it's not that there's any limitation to what we're doing. This doesn't have to be luxury. In fact, we're talking about bare surfaces, concrete everywhere. Like this lends itself very well to a less high-end context, a loft-like thing. You think about Tribeca in New York. You think about Wynwood in Miami. You think about these neighborhoods where you had, when you walk into the building in areas like that, you expect to see something a little different on the inside, something a little more industrial, and that's something we can do very easily. Our approach lends itself to that. So we're really open to it's quite a wide range of projects, and possibly other parts of the country, other parts of the world as well.
This project actually reminds me of a conversation I had with an American architect, and he told me that with their drywall construction, timber framing construction method, they plan every building to last for like 15 years. And I was shocked as a European with grandparents living in a 50-year-old house. And it's actually, we discovered it's like a European approach to build for resilience for the worst case scenario. And it's more American to build for the usual normal case. And if a fire comes, if a big storm, hurricane comes, then we'll build a new one.
We feel that's the wrong way to think about it for so many different reasons. One, it's not financially stable. I think insurance costs are rising. The coverage is rising as well. So you're less covered to replace that 15-year-old home than you were 20 years ago, for example. And I think the environmental impact is huge. If you just are constantly, if we're being thoughtful about things like water bottles, how could you not be thoughtful about the longevity of a house?
No, and look, houses don't fall apart all at once. So a house that's going to last 15 years is going to gradually fall apart for 15 years while you're living in it.
So lots of replacement of little pieces.
So the whole experience, of inhabiting that house is going to consist of things breaking or molding or, reaching the end of their particular lifetime. If you're building a house that's supposed to last much, much longer, then, you can expect the pace of change in that house to be much slower and a better living experience. We've experienced that in our own house. We live in we live in a townhome that we did
New
not.
construction, 5 years old.
Yeah, we didn't design it, we didn't build it. What we live in it, and we've learned a lot about what not to do just from living in that house, because it's just one problem after another.
7 months into living that house in the middle of the pandemic, we had a pipe burst in our garage that flooded our downstairs, inside the house and in the garage. This is Thanksgiving, pandemic, and the two of us and our 13-year-old are breaking apart the walls to try to figure out where the leak is coming from. And it wasn't a trickle of water, it was a huge rush. And it was just mind-blowing that you'd put something so essential to the house, the main water line, in the wall in such a way that if you have a massive flood, you're ripping in order to identify where it's coming from, turn it all off.
Oh, and then you have to replace.
And then we had to replace a lot of drywall throughout the house, flooring. It was a mess, and that's one of 10 incidents we've had in the house.
Then we had a lot of moisture problems in the attic. We had mold problems. We had problems in the ducts. We had problems in the electric.
And we're not unique in South Florida.
And it's what you said. Things are not built to last. Why? Maybe it's cultural. Maybe it's economic. I think a lot of people have a mortgage. The bank cares only about the security of that mortgage, so it's 30 years, maybe less. Nobody cares past that, right? So.
I'm not sure that they don't care, but
established. No,
I'm not sure that they don't care, but I think that
they're
not thinking
about. They don't have
about
financial interest, okay? Because it's the bank's money, and then they only care through the horizon of that mortgage, right? And it's a credit society, and people tend to think in those terms, and then they don't really think their kids are going to grow up and live in the same house or even in the same town, right? So why worry about 50 years from now? I think some people are different. I was talking to somebody about this just earlier this week, who grew up in the United States, and she got it completely. She said, yes, my parents lived in that house since their parents lived in the house, and I grew up in the house, and like that became very important to our family. It's a big part of our identity. It's like the home. And so that's, it's a different approach.
That's beautiful. Now I have one last question for you. Can you debunk one myth for me about sustainable living? Something people think is sustainable that's actually not sustainable.
It's obvious, I think, to many people that electric cars are at the high end of the market, slightly faddish and a little bit out of hand. So now we're building vehicles that weigh 9,000 pounds or 10,000 pounds, and
that are electric.
And now you have a flood of people who are now kind of free in their conscience to buy a very large electric vehicle. We have electric Cadillac Escalade that came out. We have an electric Hummer. Those vehicles. And this will be like a single person, buying this, somebody who doesn't need 8 or 9 seats, doesn't live in an area where they're driving over a mountain every day. They just like this really huge sort of toy truck. And those are surging in popularity because I think people feel, it's sustainable because it's electric. But if you really look at the total life cycle costs of the car and all the materials that go in it and all the enormous battery pack that has to be recycled, it turns out you're kind of back where you started, and the electric car is no more efficient than a smaller gasoline-powered car. So I think that's one area where people are overreacting to the fact that it's electric and kind of forgetting everything else about sustainability. Of course, and the heavy car is dangerous on the roads to the other cars, and plus the pavements now have to be firmer, and we can't all drive around in a tank. I think it's great that people want to buy an electric car, but
we've had lots of discussions. Ted drives a teeny tiny gasoline car. I drive a medium electric car that fits our 5 children in it. So I'm driving for the.
No, but even,
I'm driving at capacity.
No, but even we are. You know, I mean, you've looked at these big cars. You're like,
Yeah.
oh, that's great. Because who wouldn't want, you know, a giant car? If
But when you
if there was
understand the
no
impact.
Yeah, if you're like, well, I don't have to feel bad about this. You know, like it's fine. It's electric. You know, it's not quite enough. I think. On the flip side, you know, putting solar panels on your house is a good idea. Having solar panels on your apartment building, so there's another one. You know, people build up a 40-story high-rise here, and then they'll sell, you know, 300 condos, and they'll advertise that the building has solar, right? Solar panels. So I'm like, well, how many solar panels can you get on the roof of a 40-story building? You know.
The same number that we have here.
You see this all the time, right? I see this all the time. One of these new, I don't know if it's the one in the Grove or, you know, one of these new developments in Miami saying they're advertising that it's solar. Well, I mean, it's great. I'm glad they have a few solar panels, but that's not really gonna, you know, move the needle. That shouldn't be a deciding factor. People have to do the math, you know, with all these things.
These are great points to think about. Thank you so much. Now, if people want to follow your work, where can they find you?
We're at www.caplowmanzano.com and on Instagram at caplowmanzano.
Great. Thank you so much. It's been really a refreshing conversation.
It was really nice to meet you. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
A huge thank you for listening. Make sure you subscribe to the show wherever you listen to the podcast to support me and so you don't miss an episode. And while you're there, I'd also be so grateful if you could rate and review us. If you have any guest suggestions or any feedback, you can find me on the socials at LadinaShipf. Thanks.